Good afternoon and welcome to this public meeting of the Select Committee of Tynwald on Whistleblowing Policy Implementation. I'm Julie Edge, MHK, and I chair this committee. Along with me today are Tim Glover, MHK, Anne Caller, MHK, and Mr Gary Clue, MLC, and our clerk. Please can we ensure that any mobile phones are on silent or switched off so that we do not have any interruptions. And for the purposes of Hansard, I'll be ensuring that only one person is speaking at any one time. Thank you. So, for the record, would you mind introducing yourself and each one of you and what capacity you're appearing before us today?
Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Rob Callister, MHK, and I'm the Chair of the Public Service Commission.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Mummery, and I'm a non-political member of the PSC.
Good afternoon. My name is Augustine Okanlawon. I'm a non-political member of the PSC.
And I'm Julie Bradley, and I'm Secretary to the PSC.
Thank you. So, would you mind, Chair, explaining what the Public Services Commission role is in relation to the whistleblowing process?
Yeah, so the Public Service Commission, their responsibility is to implement the policy, and over the last 10 years that policy has developed and it will continue to develop in the future. So 2016 we had a policy, and then that was significantly updated in 2021, and then obviously in October 2022 it was updated again, and some of the key features introduced there through the Public Service Commission was obviously the clearer reporting line, strength and protection and support, and the mandatory training at the time, which was 5 years. And all of this continues to evolve. So if we then move forward to 2026, after the committee recommendations from 2021, we then improved it further by obviously reflecting the changes to the Employment Amendment Act 24, the duty to report, and obviously then we changed it then to the mandatory training to 3 years, and the general oversight and the anonymous reporting, which was clearly outlined this morning. So the actual Public Service Commission in respect of whistleblowing is one, to make sure that we are implementing a strong whistleblowing policy, and then thereafter making sure that that whistleblowing policy is distributed right across government, and we are getting feedback in respect of the number of whistleblowing cases that are being made by individual departments. I'll just open it to my colleagues. Have they got anything further to add on that?
Can I further add that
Yep.
the PSC, there is an act, the PSC Act of 2015,
Yeah.
and within that act it sets out that the PSC has corporate responsibility to develop corporate HR policies that are developed and then subject to approval by Council of Ministers too.
Anything you want to add, Bill or Augustine?
No, that's fine for me.
Yeah, I think in summary, we own the policy. It originates from us, and that's part of our role as PSC.
Okay. Can I just pick up on what was just said with regards to the policy is approved by the Council of Ministers? Is it not just noted by the Council of Ministers? Previously, it's only been noted by the Council of Ministers, so that the PSC make the decision and it gets noted. Has that changed?
The Act says it should be approved by approval by Council of Ministers.
Thank you. I just pick up, because we are talking about the Act. Under the Act, under 4.4, it says an employee of the Commission must not be a member of the Commission. I understand that your Secretary is an employee of the Commission, but also the Secretary of the Commission, and under the law it clearly states that they must not be a member of the Commission. Has anybody picked that up at any point?
Yeah, under the Act, the 2015 Act, it does say under Section 4, subsection, however, an employee of the Commission must not also be a member of the Commission. That is correct. If you take, for example, Julie, who is our Secretary, she's not technically an employee. So to me that's not correct what you're saying there, because if you're actually looking, it says the employee of the Commission must not also be a member of the Commission. So she's actually there under, and I'll draw your attention to section 4.9 and also section 6 of this in relation to the delegation functions. So those that appointment from OHR, and Julie as our secretary to the committee is actually more implemented under section 4 in brackets 9 and then also section 6, and they are signed off by me as the chair under delegated responsibility.
So
Or
under
delegated, just to be clarified, that delegated functions.
The PSC is a body corporate and as such doesn't have any stationed employees.
Right.
So the PSC might, sets terms and conditions for employees that are stationed in and around different departments, boards and offices of government, but it has no direct employees of its own.
And I'd also add on that we don't have a designated budget either. So this is where, and I would again draw the attention of the committee to section 4 brackets 9 and section 6. Those are the powers that allow us to go and get the necessary resources that we need without having any officers or without having a dedicated budget.
Okay. So you believe you're complying with the Act?
Yes, I genuinely do, yes.
Thank you. And just to follow on from that, what relationship does the PSC have with the Office of Human Resources?
Well, again, it's the OHR are there to be our secretary, but there's also a very close relationship, and it's the same throughout government. We try, as you say, we have that relationship with OHR, which then has that greater relationship right across government, and it is imperative for me. I'm very grateful to have OHR as our secretary because it allows us to get the information that we need to make sure that this whistleblowing policy is being complied to, and we're getting the data back. Because, as I've said again, the PSC does not have a budget and it does not have officers. So for us to then communicate to every single board, every single department, in order to get the monthly information that we desperately need to ensure that the policy is working correctly, the only way we can do that is through our relationship with OHR, which is vitally important. I don't think anything you want to add on that.
The Act sets out delegations to officers stationed within OHR because, as we said, the PSC has no stationed employees, but it has a number of responsibilities set out in the Act that it needs people to do that work. So that work is undertaken by way of some delegations, or for example, the policy team within OHR develops the policies, including the whistleblowing policy, for subsequent consideration by the PSC and by the Council of Ministers.
And if there's a policy developed within OHR that then gets presented to the PSC as a board, you've not been involved in that policy before it's come to the board?
Oh no, we would be involved in the policy. We'd be involved in the development, and for example, with the whistleblowing policy, the team in OHR undertook all the consultation with the unions through the Industrial Relations Forum. So all the legwork in the development and subsequent production of the policy was undertaken by staff in OHR.
But you as an individual, as the secretary, has not had involvement in that?
I would be involved in that, yes.
You would be?
Yeah.
Do you not think there might be a conflict there when you're actually representing as the PSC?
No, I don't think so, no. Okay. Because at the end of the day, as I said, we've got no resources, we've got no officers, so we have to rely very heavily on the OHR team. And again, if you talk about the whistleblowing policy, it's our policy, we own it, and it's up to us to make sure that that policy is fit for purpose, and then it's up to us to work with OHR to make sure it's delivered right across government. And I will actually put this on the record that, looking at the Isle of Man whistleblowing policy, it is without doubt one of the strongest in the British Isles. Absolutely. The only one that comes very close to the Isle of Man is Scotland. The Isle of Man has a very robust whistleblowing policy, and it sets out very clearly the process if somebody wants to make a submission. And we would, again, as my colleague said this morning, absolutely encourage people to make submissions if they've got concerns, which clearly is identified within the policy. Then they've got an absolute duty to make sure they're reported and reported correctly as per the policy. Any of my colleagues got anything to add?
No, taking a sort of, as it were, a commercial view, I would say that, in effect, OHR is our channel to market. We set the policy and put in place the rule set that we believe is appropriate. That is then rolled out at various levels using the resource of, in part, of OHR.
And also,
I think
sorry.
it's worth mentioning that part of our role has to do with the strategic functions which we have delegated to HR to do for us. So they are the one in charge of the strategic function of the role of the PSC.
Just picking up on what the chair was saying, and I hear what he's saying, that it's a very robust policy, but we as a committee and everyone else are here to make it even better than it is at the current time. So there's always room for improvement. Would you agree?
Absolutely, and if, as I've said in my opening remarks, if you go back to 2016, I think it's very clear to show that the policy wasn't as strong as it was. It then got strengthened through the last committee. It then got, in 2022, it then got strengthened further in 2025. So it will always be strengthened along the way, but this is again comes down to the importance of having OHR alongside us as the secretarial, because we can then delegate this back through, through the council ministers, through HR, to make sure this is going right across government, because I think the landscape from 2016 to 2026 is significantly improved. It really has.
We did request a written submission from you, but we didn't receive a response. Why was that?
What relating to? Because we did make a formal submission to the
To what
inquiry.
we're doing, the work of the committee.
Mr. Glover, we did make a formal submission to the committee. I have a copy here if you haven't received this. Can we just clarify that? Has anyone got a quick copy? Yeah, we have got
PSC.
PSC, yeah. We have a copy.
Want me to pick it up?
We,
Let's have a quick look, and maybe that we've seen it and we just haven't recognised it.
Yep. It's a copy.
What's PSPA?
Yeah, it's unheaded PSC.
yeah,
Here's a copy.
and we made it within the time frame allowed to us. So I'm sorry if the committee had not had sight of that. But we made a 19-page submission to your committee.
I've not seen it.
Okay, thank you.
I'm really sorry if we've lost it.
Okay.
Chair, could I just go back to your question about conflict within OHR? I said before that OHR, the team in there, produces, develops, researches policies, including whistleblowing. It's then presented to the PSC for consideration, and quite frequently, much to my frustration, they will challenge us, it will change things, but there isn't the conflict in that regard, because it will be challenged and approved ultimately by the PSC.
Yeah, and we sign it off, and we will make amendments. As my colleague Bill has said, we own the policy. And I think when we've compared this against to any other jurisdiction in the British Isles, the Isle of Man's is absolutely significantly better. The only one that comes close is Scotland. And as you say, they may have an element of independent reporting, but they don't have, like we have, that duty to make sure they're reporting correctly. Theirs is only relating to the health service, ours is right across government.
And every
Could I just add, sorry, I think if we didn't have that working relationship with OHR, then the quality of what we produce would not be where it needs to be, and hopefully is.
Okay. And each time that the policy's changed, I think that you said as Secretary that's done with the unions involved in every time there's a policy change. Has that definitely happened on every rendition? And also, is there anybody still on the Commission that knows why the policy was changed to take MHKs and politicians out of the flowchart? I think it was taken out in 22.
Are you talking about the prescribed person?
No, not prescribed persons, no. We were always in the policy, just in the flowchart, that people could come to a politician. Particularly, I don't know if some of you were listening in this morning, if it's about senior officers, some people are a bit nervous, and I don't know if that was the reason it was in there, but it was certainly in there up until 2022 and it was taken out. So is anybody aware why and the policy change?
There's nothing to stop anybody, going to an MHK or anybody else they need for support. But what's really important, and the rationale behind it, is that you have to go to the correct person to get the protection. So if somebody blows the whistle to an MHK, they're not protected. So that's why the policy aims to steer people in the right direction. You have to blow the whistle to the right person or body, otherwise the protection falls away.
I just want to come in on that. It's absolutely right. I have no problem again, we all wear multiple hats in this role as being members of the House of Keys. I have no problem somebody coming to me, asking me to have a look at something as a constituency MHK or as an MHK, and then for me guiding them back to where the policy is. And it's up to that individual to make the submission as per the policy. And I think you, Chair, criticised me the other day where I'd actually done that, and to me I would encourage anyone, if they've got a whistleblowing case and they're not too sure who to approach, there's no harm in them approaching a member of the House of Keys, even though they're not a prescribed person, but then for that MHK then to guide them back to what the policy says and to make sure they make the submission correctly in order to get the protection, but also to make sure the matter is fully investigated.
Can I comment?
Yeah.
I can easily understand that someone might well feel more comfortable going to their MHK to get guidance and advice, and that's positive. And then from that, to make sure they don't go down a blind alley, as it were, in that through the conversation with their MHK, they're pointed in the right direction.
So would you be prepared to put an MHK back in that flow diagram like it was in 2016?
Well, I think just to come on that point, I mean, we're happy to look at that as a committee, but again, you're talking back to 2016. We're now in 2026. The policy and the procedure has increased and improved significantly. I wasn't on the board at the time, but I think what we need to do is to focus to make sure, is the 2026 policy fit for purpose? And I genuinely believe it is. It is there to protect whistleblowers when they make submissions, but it's also there to make sure that if somebody has a genuine concern, we want to hear it, it needs to be recorded, it needs to be investigated. It's really important that people follow the process, because we're there, that policy is there to protect the individual. It really is.
And I think that's clear. People go to their MHKs as a very last resort. So if they are still coming to us, why isn't it more open and transparent that they can? I think that's the thing. People end up coming to you when it possibly could be too late, and we could perhaps advise earlier. Not advise, just give them a direction.
Yeah,
so.
And in the policy, we've set out a large number of people that you can go to blow the whistle to. And there's a lot of people, and the responsibility for OHR then is to make sure those people are adequately trained. So I think, there are a lot of people you can already blow the whistle to, and absolutely if people feel comfortable talking to their MHK or other people, they could still do that, but it's important to make sure they get the right protection that sits with it.
I think we should not lose sight of why the policy, because the policy is there to help the organization. We want people to come and tell us what they've seen, if there's anything going wrong. So it is not a competition. Yet in saying that, they might feel more comfortable addressing it to somebody else. But at the end of the day, we want to solve problem. We want to make sure that there's transparency, there's trust, there's integrity in the process. And that is why the policy has been set out, that will spell out how you go about it. So if somebody comes to you and say, well, I've seen this, okay, fine. Every case must be investigated. We cannot just dismiss it. So it's good to be investigated, but using the laid down procedure as specified in the policy, because that is the document we can defend and refer to. Have you followed the procedure? Yes. So if somebody comes to you, take it back to where it belongs and let me know, I'm sure, what's going on. So eventually you get to know how that case is developing, if that person chooses to come back to you to let you know.
Madam Chair, can I just come in again on that particular point? This isn't about two people in opposite corners. There isn't an employee in one and OHR or a department in the other, and PSC stroke OHR in the centre here. This is about people having a path to make genuine concerns if and when they see them. I think it goes beyond this as well, that members of the House of Keys also need to understand whistleblowing themselves, because if they get an initial inquiry, somebody says, I'm really not too sure about this, I'm a bit concerned about what's happening at work, I could do some advice. It's up to them to understand the whistleblowing policy themselves, listen to what they say, have a look at the policy themselves, and then to guide them back to make sure they are reporting it to their line manager, or they go through the anonymous line, or they go to the Chief Executive Office. The document, as we've published in October, is set out very clearly to help employees today. I cannot speak for what happened in 2016, but again, I go back to the point that we have a very clear, robust whistleblowing policy today in 2026.
We've heard a lot about the updates, and we've moved forward from 2016. But how do you measure that? How do you measure that it's improved?
Well, I can only, as the chair, I can only talk about my time because I wasn't. So that goes back to about November 2023. So as the chair, and with my colleagues alongside us, we're now getting a lot more data, and that is thanks to the secretarial and through the the Human Office of Human Resources. So every month now we're getting the number of whistleblowing cases. So we know at the moment from the PSC point of view, we believe there's 3 whistleblowing cases within PSC workers. We believe there may be another additional one that goes right across government. So the PSC is going right outside its remit. We are getting full information about whistleblowing cases across all boards and all departments. So we've got a very clear picture. And from that,
we heard this morning, I think, and that we had 7 cases currently.
That's in tribunal.
If I may explain the difference. So on a monthly basis, I report to the PSC the number of PSC cases that are sitting under with PSC employees. That's a different group of employees than the whole of government. So
I wanted that on record.
Yeah, so there are differences.
But every quarter we're also getting the update right across government, which is then shared with central government as well, the senior group within central government. So a lot more people now are actually being fully aware of the number of cases. As the Public Service Commission, we do not get full details of what those cases relate to. We'll maybe get that it relates to the Department of Infrastructure, or may relate to Manx Care, or it may relate to the Health Department. What we'll actually get is an overview. So we'll say that this started on the 1st of January, and so far there's been 2 meetings. So we'll get a generalised information on it, that's fine. We can then ask for more information if need be, but our understanding is trying to get the trends. If you suddenly get 7 whistleblowing cases in the Department of Infrastructure or with the Health Department, we would probably ask more questions. It's about seeing and testing the policy and making sure we're fully aware of how many cases, whistleblowing cases are actually ongoing at any one time.
And of course, the other thing to factor in here is that it's not necessarily a clean process, is it? In that a whistleblowing case may develop into other areas. So it's not, we've got this number of whistleblowing and it's now we've got this number of tribunals. The same person could be involved in both.
Yeah.
And we are, and as the PSC board, we're asking questions. So again, say for example, we had 4 at the last meeting, just hypothetically. If we had 4 at the last meeting and then suddenly we came to the next meeting, there was only 2, what we'd probably ask is what's happened to those 2 cases. So then through the secretarial, we'll probably get information around the fact that one's closed, it's been dealt with and addressed, and we don't have to worry about that one. Or we may ask more questions about it, or we may say that one's actually not whistleblowing, it's actually employment, so it then goes. So there is a grey area in all of this, but we are concerned about genuine whistleblowing cases. Have they been dealt with correctly according to the policy, and what is the outcome of those? And again, that was highlighted this morning by the Office of Human Resources. Anyone got anything else?
Only to say it is a fixed agenda item that's visited every month, and ultimately, although clearly we don't carry out the investigation, as it were, the objective is to get to a position of fairness, right outcome in as good a timescale as is possible. Some cases are relatively straightforward. There's the odd one that is somewhat more perhaps has different strands to it, but we're not carrying out the investigation, but we have an overarching obligation, one, to be aware, and two, to monitor, and as I said, fairness and in a timely fashion.
So you do get to see the full case, because you can't do that otherwise.
No, we don't.
Okay.
I report on the number of cases that we've received, the number that we've got ongoing, and sort of how long they've taken. We don't put names or a
No,
whole
There's
lot
no,
of detail.
there's no personal details.
But the PSC has been involved in employment matters that an individual's raised their whistleblowing with the PSC, and there's been a full investigation by the PSC, and the outcomes of that also. What do you do with that? Because I'm aware of a few cases that people have come direct to the PSC. The PSC has investigated. They could either go back to work, or some lose that have lost their roles. So you do see full whistleblowing cases, and
Not in my
not in your time at the moment,
So
but
what-
PSC can.
Okay, what I would actually put on
Because
this
they-
is you can complain to the PSC about a department managed or a member of staff, but we can't actually get involved in disciplinary stuff here. We cannot be asked to overturn a department decision, but you can contact the PSC about whistleblowing, but we wouldn't get involved in individual cases. Normally, we don't have the resources. And we don't have the finances to look at it. Now, if somebody made a complaint to us, it's probably more likely that the board would actually pass it on to OHR, but again, they would probably then look at this and pass it on to the relevant department. So it would have to be something. The only thing the PSC would heavily get involved in is somebody was unhappy with an employment decision that has been taken somewhere else. But other than that, we wouldn't really get involved in a whistleblowing case. Really wouldn't, because we haven't got the expertise and we haven't got the staff.
So there's never been a case of a whistleblower that eventually gets a settlement agreement, and the PSC don't sign that off?
So what, just to
Or do
follow
they?
on from the chair's point, so if somebody, for example, was to make a complaint, there was a mechanism to make a complaint to the PSC, and under delegated authority I can act. So if that was to happen, I could look at the complaint, I could meet with the individuals, I could then, if I felt appropriate, instigate an investigation, commission that report and deal with it that way. So it wouldn't necessarily be a case that I would refer to the PSC. Would keep them aware of it, but there is a situation where that, as I've explained, that's what could happen.
Yeah.
Okay. And with regards
I think that rule sits well with the OHR, not necessarily with the PSC. I think for every case, whether it comes to us or it comes to you as MHK or anybody else, in addition to those that are listed, I think the best thing we can do is to point them to the right department or the right person to handle it, rather than us taking ownership of that particular issue. And there are specific, clear-cut 6 reasons that covers whistleblowing. If it's within that, yes, it's a whistleblowing, but sometimes it is outside that, and that's why it is possible for somebody to whistleblow and to have another thing, attached to it.
So you are operating slightly different to the Civil Service Commission when they were operating. The PSC's operating slightly different?
I don't know. I wasn't ever involved when it was just the Civil Service Commission.
And just with regards to, you said that you're getting the reports in from all departments, boards and officers?
Not from officers, from boards. So it comes through OHR.
Which boards?
They will feed through how many cases there are across government quarterly, and they'll report to us every month how many PSC cases there are.
Yeah.
When you can I just clarify? When you say reports, what did you mean?
So the centralised reporting that you then take to the PSC.
That's right. So the centralised reporting comes into OHR, and we communicate that monthly.
And
to the
that
PSC.
has gone a step further, because originally we'd only report annually. And they would be in the Public Service Commission report. We now, as a board, have asked for the information, and I think this came back to something that was said in Tynwald, that the PSC decided at the time that we would like to see this information more regularly. So instead of just getting the information once a year and then putting it into a PSC report, we have taken the proactive step in the last few months to actually get whistleblowing cases actually reported back to us monthly, and then the ones across government as well, which is then actually shared with senior groups within government through OHR, not through ourselves.
And who's responsible, or where's the responsibility lie for the Operational Performance Board? Because they have an oversight duty of whistleblowing as well.
Yeah, so
Does that come from the PSC or?
It will come from OHR. So every year we've committed to report, every quarter we'll report into the OPSCB
As well.
about, again, the same data we provide to the PSC, the number of cases, where they're up to, etc. So that will happen quarterly.
I
think one of the challenges and difficulties I'm having, I mean, our remit is to look at the effectiveness of our whistleblowing policy implementation. Now, I'm quite comfortable in saying that 5 years ago even, things seemed quite broken in some respects. Okay. 10 years ago, probably even more so. I don't know. But we have a new policy that came out in October. We have new, the reporting system we have now is new. All of this is new. It's very difficult to evaluate the effectiveness of the current policy and the current procedures, by looking back 3, 4, 5 years. And that's a challenge because lots of the evidence we've had is back from a period where things were not as clear as they are right now. So in some respects, yes, there are I think there are lessons to have been learned. There are recommendations. There's various things that will always come out. But to some extent, looking at the current implementation, what we did, what the current law is, and the current implementation is in a way a little bit premature because we don't have any real data on that. I think that will come over time, but that's sort of a dilemma that I'm struggling with is evaluating clear historical problems with what we have now.
Can I jump in on that one, Gary? It's and I do thank you for the question. I think there's always lessons to learn, and this is probably the reason why I personally, as an MHK, voted against setting up this committee. It wasn't the fact that I'm not passionate about whistleblowing and about people reporting. It was the fact that I know that the latest policy, the strengthened policy which I've outlined, only came into effect in October, and it needed time to embed. We needed time to get feedback to be able to understand if the training is working, if the policy is working. I would have wished that this committee was set up early in the next administration to look back. But as you say, if you go through the history, go right the way back to 2016, we have significantly evolved around this policy, and it will continue to evolve over the next 10, 15 years. But at the end of it, I wish we had a little bit more time to see how the new policy, because it's really difficult for us, to say, other than to say that it is an incredibly strengthened policy. We have introduced this mandatory training, compulsory training for new starters. It's a question now of allowing the workforce right across the Isle of Man government have the confidence to make those submissions, where in 2016 they may not have felt as confident to make those submissions. But I hope people today can, with confidence, make those submissions.
Yeah, I think the issue right now is just sort of a lack of evidence on what the current situation is. As I say, that doesn't invalidate anything that we're looking at, because there's always, as I say, there is always things we can learn, and
I think
you can feed back into.
To add to your concern, we are also interested. PSC is also interested in saying that this works, because it's in our own interest. So as much as you are interested to evaluate whether it is working, we are also equally interested to see whether it is working, or whether we need to do something, or rejig it, or add something to it, or take something out. So we are equally eager, because at the end of the day, we want people to be able to speak out. We want people to have the environment where they can freely express or tell us what is going on without any recrimination.
Can I add to that? I absolutely agree that the real data the real pictures and the real information we get from the new data is so important. But also, we shouldn't lose sight of the historical data we have got. It also tells a story. And I think even if you go back to the inception of the integrity line back in 2022 or three, people do use the integrity line. So, that must in some way indicate that the whistleblowing process is working. Absolutely, we can improve on it. And absolutely, we'll interpret and collate better data in future. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of the data that we have got.
I think it's a little bit like turning an oil tanker. We've recognised we've made some significant changes, and certainly have a much better understanding and grasp of the subject matter, and as you rightly say, we're in that stage where of measurement, but that timeline has been very short. We need some more qualitative information.
I completely understand that time has been short, but my question would be then, how do you intend to monitor and evaluate the policy and the process as you go forward?
Well, I think from our point of view is about getting this data every month, looking for trends, looking to see if there's stuff coming back through. And then at the end of it is just seeing this policy, seeing the number of whistleblowing cases coming through, and just seeing if there's anywhere we need to strengthen this policy. At the moment, I think the policy is good. I think the reporting line's there. There's a designated website there as well. There's the anonymous line there. As I say, I think all of us in this room agree that government employees of any level should be able to make a submission when they genuinely believe there is a concern, especially around corruption, bribery, health and safety issues. They should be reported and they should be taken seriously. They should not be vilified in any way, and I've not seen any evidence to say people have been vilified. And so I don't know what happened previously, but from today, people should make those submissions if they feel genuinely concerned about something. They should get the protection. It should be dealt with in a timely manner, and at the end of it there should be an outcome to say thank you for your concern, but we don't believe this needs any further investigation, or you are absolutely right and this is what we've improved to make sure the system is better for your colleagues. I don't know if you've got anything to add on that, Jules?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Just picking up on that, and we're all trying to improve things, and by having these evidence sessions, as the executive director of OHR, who's had quite a long day in here already today, will observe there were things this morning that are being taken away, so it's always good to question and look at things.
I completely agree. I mean, as we said, the reporting process, for example, is very new. Once we've got maybe a year into it, it will be time again to stand back and look and say, is this working? Are we capturing the right data? What are we doing with this information? So none of the OHR policies are set in stone forever. It's really important that we keep them under review and keep them relevant.
Can I just follow up on that? Because when we were talking this morning, you said that, that overarching impact assessment really wasn't taking place.
Prior to yes, that's right.
So does that sit with the PSC or does it sit with OHR?
That's
Where does that sit?
Historically, there was no requirement for anyone to capture the data or for any designated managers to report in. And I think there were good reasons for that. But, it's very apparent to me that as a government, as OHR, as the PSC, we should have some oversight into, why are people blowing the whistle? What's happening? How long are these cases taking? What are these outcomes? What are we learning from them? So whether it's with my hat as OHR or the PSC, it's really important that we do that. So I fully support the new reporting process.
And is it intended that then you would feed that through to PSC? Because if you hold the policy, then surely you must hold some responsibility to evaluate how that's working.
That's right.
Yeah. We take it very seriously. We really do. I mean, I think the previous chair, Kate Lord-Brennan, myself as the current chair, we really do want the information back. We want to know, but it's not just about, a monthly, or there's 3 and then ignore it. We do ask questions. Every one of us from the PSC board asks questions about what is the length. We had one not so long ago when it came through, and the length of time was over 6 months, and the question was, why has it taken 6 months? The other 2 were relatively new. So we asked questions, we probed a little bit. We don't want to know about the individual involved, and we don't really want to get down to the detail of it, but we do want to know why it's taken 6 months. What has been the blockage? And in that particular case, I think it was the employee did not want to engage or wasn't engaging in the process. So maybe that's something, we have to look around later on to see if there's any time frames in this. If you make a submission, you have to have the first, I know there is a procedure about the timelines, but something which can close it off if the person makes the submission, doesn't engage in the process, and it just leaves open for 6 months. That's not fair on the employee, and it's not unfair on the employer either. So these are the sort of things that we need to look at, but we are very concerned when we get the cases they are asked, and the same about employment disputes, the same about any sort of grievance or information that we get, same as sickness levels. We really do question every bit of data that comes through to us.
As I say, I think part of that and the process that we're on a relatively early trajectory is the people's experience. How have they found the process? That's part of the learning.
So how are you getting that feedback from the individual? Because we've talked about every whistleblower should be investigated. So if there's an investigation report, do you get to see the investigation report? Because how can you make improvements if you don't? If there's recommendations in an investigation, how do they come through to the PSC?
Well, we are, as I say, we sit quite high up in this. We do not get the final reports. We do not see any of the details. We would get, as I just said before, if there was 3 1 month and suddenly goes down to 2, we may ask what happened to the 2 that's closed, what's actually happened. We may get some information to say it was investigated, it was found there was nothing there, that's it. Or we could ask more questions. So it's about, we're looking for trends. We're looking for, if, for example, as I said earlier, if one department suddenly gets a lot of whistleblowing inquiries, then we would certainly ask for further information about that.
So we heard this morning that there are numerous investigations that cost a lot of money to the taxpayer of the Isle of Man, probably could be £20,000 a time. There's a lot of them happen when a whistleblowing report comes in. Are you saying that the PSC, who is the employing authority, does not have a say about the outcomes of them investigations? You never get to see that an investigation done possibly independently doesn't come back to you for you to see the recommendations, so that then you can ensure that the policy going forward. And we did hear that some recommendations might not get implemented by the departments, but if I was a PSC employee, I was a Civil Service Commission employee, I wasn't a PSC employee. If I was an employee and you're my employer, I don't want my department telling me anything about it. I want my employer to say, we're satisfied that this has been dealt with appropriately in accordance. Is that missed out at the moment? Is that a gap?
The PSC, obviously, as we said, is a body corporate. It doesn't have any stationed employees. So what it does is delegate certain functions to different people, so to myself as secretary, but it also delegates responsibility for other functions to the accounting officers within departments. So it would be ultimately the responsibility of the accounting office to make sure that the whistleblowing processes, the reports, the recommendations would be dealt with appropriately.
I think just to add on
but
that.
How do you check that? That's where I'm coming from.
Well, no, we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful about what our role is here. We're talking about the policy. So, if, for example, somebody made a whistleblowing claim, and it was then found that it was bribery and corruption or something or other, as a breach of health and safety, I would expect the department to deal with any findings of that and to implement it robustly. So if take health and safety, if there's a health and safety concern, I'd expect the department to be dealing with it. It's not for us. Now, if somebody then finds, say for example, what would come to our attention, and possibly through our HR, if it came to our attention where there was a health and safety concern that was absolutely, clearly identified, but then it wasn't followed through by the department, it was reported back to us, we would definitely pick that up, and we'd probably go through HR and then the chief executive officer to find out why that hadn't been implemented. That's slightly different because we're looking at the policy. If somebody reports something on a health and safety ground, and that health and safety ground has been reported correctly and has gone through the investigation, and it's been found that something needs to be improved, and the department doesn't follow through in it, and the employee then contacts us, I promise you it will go straight to the chief executive officer to actually look at this and understand and to report back to us as to why that hasn't been implemented. But again, we're talking really outside, we're talking very hypothetically here, we really are.
Well, for example, under Section 5, functions of the Commission, under K, it says to make arrangements for loss of office in relation to any public sector employee.
Sorry, Madam Chair, can you just go which document you're referring to?
Public Services Commission Act.
Okay.
So under Section 5, functions of the Commission.
Yeah.
Under K, to make arrangements, I'm just using K as an example, for loss of office in relation to any public sector employee.
Yeah.
That could be a whistleblower, but you're telling us that you don't get involved in anything. And some people, have lost their office due to whistleblowing or being part of a whistleblowing situation. So clearly in there, the PSC should be involved.
Well,
but if you're not seeing...
Do you want to go?
Yep, sorry. So the Act obviously does say that, as you've pointed out.
Yeah.
And as we said earlier, some of the because the Commission has no stationed employees, some of those
delegate.
functions are delegated to OHR, to myself and some of my colleagues. So on behalf of the PSC, we would undertake that function.
But you're
we
still the
notify.
employing body for the individual.
Oh, but
We still
again,
notify.
as I say, they are the central person who collected the information. They would get this data. If there was a serious breach and the investigation was found that there had been a breach, I'm almost certain that OHR, the department, everything else would make sure that's implemented. What might happen in that circumstance is the fact that OHR would brief the PSC to say, we've had this health and safety concern, the investigation's found this is what's happened to implement it.
Yeah. And the reporting of settlement agreements is something
Yeah.
we do on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
And if there was a situation, go back to what the Chair said with regards to health and safety, and it ended up in the courts, are you saying you're not the employer at that point? You hand it to the department?
Again, we're talking very hypothetically. We're talking about a policy here. It's really hard to talk about something which we're not involved in. But I would expect, if it's a PSC matter, for us to be informed of what's happening as a board, as per the Act.
Yeah, the PSC is the employer, but the stationed employer would be the department they work in. Ultimately, the employer is the PSC.
So if there was a case, it could be the
Yeah,
PSC chair that goes to the
It will probably be officers.
officers.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the same for an employment tribunals, isn't it?
Yeah.
We don't go to them. We are the titled and saying that individual works for the Department of Infrastructure, but they are employed by the Public Service Commission. That doesn't mean that I have to turn up to every tribunal. It goes through their employer, which is the Department of Infrastructure, and then, depending on what happens, is we will get a copy of the report to see. And again, we're looking for improvements or ways of actually improving the system and the policies and processes.
So you get copies of the employment tribunals, but you don't get a copy of the internal
No,
process.
to be fair, we don't get copies, but I, as the chair, I do follow them myself personally.
I think that will be going to operational issue. That's been delegated to HR, so they only report to us just the number of cases. So because that's outside our, it should be outside our
anything in the
remit.
Act that needs updating?
In the
Can
Is
Act,
there anything in the Act that you think's not
I
working?
think it's also, can I just go back to the point we made? I think it's also, to make sure it's absolutely clear here, that we also have to remember that the chief officers within departments are also accountable to the PSC as well. So it's not just us standing alone here, and this is one of the reasons why we have the chief executive officer sitting now on the PSC board. So we have a real clear ear right across government here, where we have OHR and we have the chief executive officer. So if there are concerns around whistleblowing, we can deal with it quite quickly. Really can.
So how's the chief executive officer sitting on the board?
They've always sat on there as one of the members in there, and I think again it's absolutely right that the chief executive officer should be there. Absolutely, because we are trying to implement policy right across government. And it was something that I brought back myself. I invited the chief executive back because it was absolutely right. If we are going to improve whistleblowing and we're going to improve processes and procedures right across government, then we need the top people at that table.
yeah, in terms of the PSC constitution, the chief executive officer isn't on the PSC commission, but he's invited every month to the meetings. Just put that clarity around.
Thank you.
So he just comes and pops in, gives a report.
I've invited
leaves,
him every month.
Because it's very clear in the Act that it should only be the chair, the vice chair, and three individuals.
Yeah, just for clarity.
Yeah.
He's invited by the commission to every meeting.
Yeah, apologies, I should have said that.
Could I just ask, just listening to the answers there, so is it true to say that you hold the policy, but you delegate the responsibility for the implementation of the policy to others?
Parts of it, not all of it.
What responsibility do you hold?
So I
Or the
think
policy.
the responsibility for the commission is set out in the Act in terms of the development and subsequent referral to the Council of Ministers. That's what the Act says the commission's required to do.
So can I just follow up that you invite people, but you've only invited the chief executive officer so far, but you could invite anybody. And how are you doing that under the Act? Is that under Section 9? Subject to this Act, the Commission may regulate its own proceedings.
Yes.
Is that how you'd be doing that invitation? Because the Act's very clear. Chief executive officer of government. There's nowhere in the Act to say that they
Well, you
can.
the delegation of function, it does say, you know, you
You've
may
done it as a
authorise any
delegation
member
of
stuff.
function.
And the same under, again, the same one, 4.9, we can invite anybody. And
Just to clarify, is when you invite the chief executive officer, does he have a vote?
No. He's purely there. He is there basically to listen.
So he's not being co-opted onto the committee or anything like that, onto the commission, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've got the policy, but fundamentally, it all ultimately goes back down to the law, the Employment Act and things, which is kind of has primacy. And I know when we heard from the Attorney General's chambers, it was mentioned that one of the challenges with the policy is that it tries to do several things. And my question is, and again, I haven't spoken to too many people about the current variation of the policy, but in the earlier instantiations, is there a danger, or is there, I think, that employees have an unrealistic expectation in some cases of what the policy does, because again, from the legalistic point of view, whistleblowing, to become protected disclosure, you have to impart information, which is about what the nature of the breach or whatever it is, and we hear quite a lot from individuals who've made what they believe to be a protected disclosure, and they'll quote the whistleblowing policy, but then it's determined that it's not whistleblowing, and then they feel sort of cheated, as it were, but perhaps because they didn't meet that information threshold somewhere along the line. So there's no easy answer, and I wouldn't even know how to approach it. But I think that is one of the potential things, is that sometimes you can look at the policy and read things into it that don't necessarily have any basis in reality. Again, I'm not sure how you address that. Any document, any policy you have is always going to have some level of interpretation issue.
I think one of the things that will help is the training. It's now become mandatory.
Yes.
So that hopefully that will reduce the expectation to say, within this policy, these are the things I can do, but outside that, they have got to approach another policy or another procedure. So the training should be able to flag that one out if everybody knows exactly what is expected and is mandatory.
I think,
And managing that expectation at an early stage, so people don't get frustrated by the process.
I think I said earlier, in developing the policy, we've tried to make it transparent, clear, easy to read. And whilst that absolutely has been our goal, it's a really complex piece of legislation. It's a really complex process. And again, I've said, this isn't something that people find easy to do. So, we're asking people who find themselves in a difficult situation, having to read through a lengthy policy. So I completely agree. And people, with the best will in the world, I sometimes have to pick up the policy to understand what to do properly. So I completely understand that individuals who choose to blow the whistle have to then read a complex policy, might have different expectations, different understandings, and that often in itself will cause conflict. So I fully accept your point, but in trying to make it really easy, we've probably made it long.
Yeah, I think the other issue is that I don't believe any employee is sitting there waiting for an opportunity to blow the whistle. And so you can send people to training classes, put them in an hour session and various other things, and unless it actually affects them, it goes in one ear and out the other for most people. And that's the problem, is a year later, 2 years later, something comes up, and even though you're within your 3-year time frame, you've forgotten everything. You forgot what you an hour after you left the room. So yes, you're right. At that point, there's a lot of catch-up work to do, and again, I'm not sure how. You say, well, you can have refresher courses, things like that. But again, 90-something probably 99% of employees will never ever blow the whistle. It'll never be relevant to them. So, and if you're putting everybody in even for an hour, that's a huge number of person hours that are going into training that may never ever be needed.
But it is about when it is about sorry, Julie. It's about awareness. And again, if you go back to 2016, I don't think many government workers probably even thought about whistleblowing, but there is now this evolution, and there is now people know if they see something and it isn't right, they have got a mechanism to report it. It's very clearly laid out. There's support there, there's help there, and there is a mechanism to do it. What will happen again, as I say, this is not about them and us. When you make a submission, and nobody should feel that they are having to have a fight with their employer. This is about making a submission, and then for that submission to be taken serious and to be investigated. Now, what happens at the end of that investigation, the individual may not like the outcome, and that is a different question, but the system is there to make sure, and if there is something seriously going on within the confines of both the Public Service Commission and the wider government remit, then it is reported, it's investigated, and it's fixed. That to me is the important thing. But just to go back to your point, people are fully aware these days, and that is thanks to yourself as the chair, Julie, and the last committee. All of us are now fully aware of what whistleblowing is compared to where we were in 2016. So we have come a long way, we really have.
So when you say that you want to make sure that people are confident to come forward and whistleblow, why is it still costing us money with payoffs and everything else if there isn't a fight with the employee? If there's no fight with the employer, sorry, not the employee, there's no fight with the employer, why have we still got quite a significant number of employees that are some still in process, some possibly recently departed, and they get a conciliatory payment?
Let's just talk about today. I mean, as you say, we have a workforce of several thousand people right across government. If you check us against the private sector, these agreements, these settlement agreements are happening every day of the week in the private sector. The government is no different. And as you say, I know for this year, when we had our last meeting, we have about 13 settlements for 2026. It's still, some would argue it's too many. Now, I don't see the detail of what relates to those 13 agreements. I know there is. Again, I'm looking for trends. If there's suddenly 5 or 6 settlement agreements in one department, I think the PSC board rightfully would ask questions about what's happened, what's going on in that particular department. But from our point of view, it's about making sure that if a relationship between the employer-employee breaks, just like in the private sector, then that relationship can come to a satisfactory conclusion by both parties through an agreement or not a settlement agreement. But that doesn't mean that every single settlement agreement relates to whistleblowing. It doesn't. Yeah. And I think this is really important. We've got to, if somebody's making a whistleblowing case according to the policy, fantastic. If it then transits into an employment dispute, that's separate. Mm-hmm. And this is where we're getting a lot of confusion here. And it's about clearing it for the public as well as for the employee. Relationships on an employment level will break down all the time.
But this morning we heard that they can run parallel. Some people can be whistleblowing and there can be employment at the same time.
There can be some issues, yes, they can.
Someone might well legitimately and rightly, because they've witnessed something, feel it's appropriate to make a whistleblowing submission whilst they don't have a grievance with their employer. They've observed perhaps a colleague doing something that they think is wrong. So there is, even in analysing the progress that we're talking about, I think one of the important things is distinguishing between what was the trigger for this, and is it a standalone whistleblowing case because they have strongly held values and views, or has it slipped in as part of a grievance experience?
Just to satisfy on that, obviously under Section 5 functions of Commission, and I don't expect you to have it today, would you mind saying out of all of the functions there right through to N, what's been delegated away from the PSC? Because it's in the Act that you're responsible, but you've said a lot's been delegated away. So for example, for secondments, I'm guessing you're not involved. They get dealt with separately. So it'd be good to know what's been delegated away from the PSC board from the Act.
We could send you a copy of the delegations, but essentially what it does, without going into detail about every single function, is there are reserved functions. So there are functions that the Commission cannot delegate, and they have to retain responsibility for those. Yeah, we can send you those.
I can send
just,
I was going to say, the last ones were signed on the 14th of January 2026. Before I just let Julie come back in, can I just correct myself? I mentioned there was 13 cases. Just to clarify, the 13 cases relate to 24-25, and at the moment there's only 4 cases for 2025 going into 2026.
You say what the cost was in 24-25?
Not off the top of my head, Chair.
Sorry, what sort of cases are you talking about there?
These were the settlement cases, which is what the Chair mentioned. I mentioned there was 13 cases. I just wanted to clarify the 13 cases related 2024 to 25, and at the moment 25 going into 26. There's only been 4 settlement cases.
Settlement. Can I just clarify a point that settlement agreements are commonly used, as the Chair said, and they can be for a variety of reasons, completely, not regarding whistleblowing. It could be because somebody's, being made redundant. It could be because the relationship is broken down, and even. Every settlement agreement, you may probably have seen a copy, but every settlement agreement issued by the Manx Industrial Relations Service has a clause to say, this does not prevent a whistleblower from blowing the whistle. And the Employment Act specifically states that even if such a clause was inserted into an agreement, it's void. So, whistleblowing settlement agreements cannot, should not, and are not used to silence whistleblowers.
So why do we continue to put in settlement agreements?
I think.
Why do we do it if it's void? Why do we do it?
It's a reminder. I think it's really important that somebody signing a settlement agreement is fully aware that if they want to blow the whistle, it says in black and white, you can absolutely blow the whistle. And I think it's a really important. And actually, if I may, it was sort of clause I inserted into the agreement when I was the Industrial Relations Officer. Recently? It was during my tenure as IRO, yes.
Can we just put this into perspective? Of all of the settlement agreements that government enters into, what percentage of them relate to whistleblowing?
It would be minute. I don't have the figure. I'm trying to think as I sit here.
5%, 10%, 20%?
But how many? It'd be better to ask if you don't mind me asking, what's the percentage of that start out as a whistleblower? Because you've clearly said some end up being employment and they get paid off as employment. So it'd be, what's the percentage of whistleblowing cases coming forward and then they get diverted off to employment? Because that is happening. We've heard that this afternoon.
I think, Chair, we've got to. This you did raise this question this morning. We've got to remember what the actual policy is about. And again, if somebody makes an initial whistleblowing case, it then has to go through due process of an investigation, and at that point it may not find that it's not corruption and it's not health and safety and it's not an employment issue. So you then have to then uncouple it and say, we've investigated the whistleblowing case, there's no evidence to say this is whistleblowing. What then may transpire that this then becomes an employment issue? That we've dealt with that, the whistleblowing element of that, and it's been upheld. So it's not a case of having how many whistleblowing cases have suddenly then transit into employment. It's not. They may all both be 2 different complaints submitted, but if that one if it's upheld and said there's no evidence for that, that's not a whistleblowing case. It is an employment dispute. I think this is where there is a lot of confusion.
Well, would you not count it as a whistleblower which has been resolved?
Well, it depends. If it's found that there's no evidence for it, you are right, Jonathan. But if there's no evidence to back it up, what's been made under what the whistleblowing policy says,
but what you're saying, you're trying to encourage people to come forward. You want people to whistleblow for the protection and public safety.
Absolutely, if they've got
But then you're saying, well, no, we'll say it's this now. So
no, we're not saying,
what
no,
the
Madam
clerk
Chair, that's not what we're saying. If somebody makes a complaint that has an element of whistleblowing in it, has an element of employment dispute in it, the whistleblowing policy will be investigated according to the policy by their employer, which will be the department. If that initial investigation's found there's no evidence for that whistleblowing, the whistleblowing element goes. It then becomes an employment dispute, and if they don't like the outcome of the employment dispute, they can have the option of going to a tribunal who will then judge on that. That's very clear, and this is the problem. People submit both of these applications, and then for some reason it's disguised as whistleblowing when it's actually from the outset it's actually an employment dispute. And I'm here today as the chair of the Public Service Commission to make sure the whistleblowing policy is absolutely clear. And if somebody makes a genuine whistleblowing case, that everybody in this room and everyone within government gets behind that individual to make sure it's investigated and our systems and our workforce is protected. It's really clear on that. An employment dispute is something completely different.
So what happens if the whistleblower, what happens if the processes don't align and don't follow suit together? So you could have your whistleblower and it's taken a long time and blah, 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 but the employment matter, things do happen to our employees, some do get suspended, etc., whilst they're doing both. What we're trying to do is make it a better process, make sure everybody is looked after in that process, and there's, you know, how can we make that better? Because it's clearly not aligned at the present time.
I think in terms of two processes, you have to keep them separate. You can't. It would be easy to say, let's just combine everything and look at everything around, but you simply can't do that because, you know, if you're dealing with a whistleblowing case and an employment matter, they're two different things, aren't they? They might have the commonality of a whistleblowing or a protected disclosure, but you have to let both of them run concurrently. And it might not be that, you know, you're quite right, they probably don't align correctly with each other, but you have to just let them run their process.
Yeah.
You know, in all of that, sometimes it will be frustrating, it will be difficult, but you have to let the processes run their course.
But a number of witnesses that we've had in front of us have put a whistleblowing case in, and then they suddenly find they're subjected to an employment investigation.
Yeah.
Which is...
And
what they're feeling is it's because they put whistleblowing in. So that's what we're trying to make sure there's something correct there.
That's absolutely natural. You know, you as a whistleblower in that situation, you would naturally look to, you know, try to align the 2 points. But ultimately, if the employment case is going to be proven against them, there's going to be an investigation. There's got to be evidence to say, yes, you did break the employment rules. And if they aren't there, it won't, you know, it will come to nothing.
Yeah, I think...
But they're still protected as a whistleblower on the other side for what they're doing.
Yeah. Nobody can take that away from them.
I think there shouldn't be any attempt to divert one to the other, whether it is, you know, disciplinary being diverted to whistleblowing or the other way around. They are two different things. Even let's take the extreme case that somebody is going through the true processes, but the whistleblowing is taking longer, but the outcome of the disciplinary procedure says that person should be, you know, redundant or sacked. That one, the whistleblowing case will still continue even when that individual is no more an employee of the government. That whistleblower is still protected by law.
But the protections for a whistleblower are much more significant as an employed person.
No, it's the same.
As a worker,
It's the law.
still have, as a worker, you have protection against
But
dismissal.
what you've just said is they could be made redundant or sacked. They're not no longer a worker.
You still have the
Whatever the
protection of the
outcome,
law.
whatever the outcome of the disciplinary procedure, that doesn't mean the whistleblowing would then cease, or if that employee, you know, maybe not even sacked, may resign. But that whistleblowing case is still active, and the protection is still available to that particular individual when they actually left the organization.
Madam, can I just come in? Madam Chair, you asked me before about settlement agreements, the total cost, save us having to send a correspondence. For 2024-25, as I say, there was 13 settlement agreements via the PSC, and the total cost for that was 438,624 spot 53. And for 2025, there was 4 settlement agreements, and that cost is £370,897. So I have that, give that information to you.
Could do with saving that money, couldn't we?
You know, in an ideal world, there would be no settlement agreements. In reality, there will always be settlement agreements. They happen all over the world. They happen in the private sector, in the public sector, and sometimes it's absolutely the right answer for both parties.
And I think if you went into the private sector and asked them, I genuinely believe there is hundreds of settlement agreements, if not thousands, every year, and it probably 10 times the amount of government. But that doesn't mean I would love, as the PSC chair, I'd love to get to a position where we don't have to have settlement agreements. But unfortunately, relationships will always break down for whatever reason, and sometimes this is the best way for both parties.
It's a matter of cost benefit.
Yeah.
Sometimes it would be beneficial to go through that route when you look at the implication.
Just moving elsewhere, you've mentioned time and time again that if you see a trend in whatever it is, figures that you're receiving, and you go and ask questions, what do you do with the answers you get? What powers do you have to follow up on the answers that you get?
Well, I personally, as the PSC chair, have actually gone and asked the chief executive if they need any more support or any help, if there's anything we can do. But again, if you go back to that case where we had one which had gone on for 6 months, the first question was to ask what's actually happening. So we are just that oversight. So far, to date in my tenure, I've not seen anything where we have to take too much action, because it, you know, most of the settlement agreements, most of the whistleblowing cases is across a number of departments, so I'm not seeing trends where suddenly there's an influx from one department which then raises the eyebrow. And given how it was previously, we are now able to see this data very quickly, where it wasn't back in 2016. We're seeing it monthly, so we can react a lot quicker than we could have done in the
But if you
previous.
did see a pattern, that's the question I'm asking,
Yeah.
what powers do you actually have?
Or have you delegated them?
Yeah. Go on, you go, Jules.
Well, I think what the PSC could do in real terms, given that they now meet the Chief Executive Officer of Isle of Man Government monthly, it would absolutely be something you'd want to raise there. But ultimately, the responsibility lies with the accounting officers, so it would be quite within the remit of the Chief Executive Officer to question the chief officers of the departments in that regard.
And I think it's important just to mention on that, Mr. Glover, is the fact that we do invite chief executive officers, not just the chief officer, we actually do invite the chief executive officers in, and we spend time with them asking them questions about how, you know, if they've got any employment issues, if they've got any issues within the departments, or any resources we need to do with regard to our remit. So we're there to help and support chief officers as well. And if, for example, just to take your situation, if we had, say, for example, a sudden trend within one department, we would probably invite the chief executive in and start asking them questions directly. So that is the process we would follow. But so far we haven't had to do that, but we do annually invite chief executive officers in to see how they're getting on with staffing issues. Is there any further resources? Is there anything else that OHR could do to help them and support them, not just delivering whistleblowing, but employment matters through the departments?
Have you ever thought of inviting employees that have gone through the situation? You know, you know that some people have gone out, and have you ever thought of inviting the employees, so you're hearing the employees' side of a situation, not just the CEOs?
That would be out of our remit as PSC. That would be out of our remit as PSC. That can be delegated to the HR if they think that's something they have to do.
Is there anything you've thought of doing? Because within the Act, again, it says that you're, it's very clear, you make arrangements for assessment, performance, appraisal of individuals, but obviously sometimes through them appraisal processes it could end up becoming an employment matter, and that's completely delegated. You don't have any. So this is to follow on from my colleague, Mr. Glover. What do you do when you hear, for example, if it's a chief operating officer or the accounting officer, if they're working for a board, their board might be their responsible employer, not the PSC, even though they could be a PSC employee, but the board's responsible within their contract for them. So it's just trying to make sure that there's a fair process for everybody, really, is what we're trying to get to. Is that process the same for chief operating officers and above as it is for anybody below?
The policy as it stands is for everybody. Is for everybody, irrespective of their level.
I think as well, in the new reporting process, we've implemented an ability for whistleblowers to give feedback. So I think it would be really useful. You know, we haven't got a lot of data in that regard yet, but I think absolutely that in terms of PSE staff, you should be notified about the feedback that's being collated from whistleblowers, and it might be at that point that you would look to invite somebody along and understand from their perspective. So
I think it's also,
that's looking forward rather than
I
retrospective.
think we've also got to be very careful not to step into the operational of departments, because the relationship really is between the department and the employee. So if the relationship breaks down, we've got to be really careful not to get ourselves really heavily involved in operational stuff at a time, again, which I go back to the fact we have no finances, we have no officers. So it's really difficult for us to get in to that sort of remit. But what we are worried about is making sure that, again, as I keep repeating this afternoon, there is a mechanism to report things, they are investigated, but also making sure, having a look to make sure there isn't an increase in the numbers we're seeing, and even the same with settlement agreements. You know, we want to see that lower. We want to see the number of cases in many ways. I know this morning, I think the question was asked about, would you like to see an increase or a decrease in whistleblowing cases? I personally would like to see a decrease. I'd like to get to the point where we don't need whistleblowing cases, but that's because the policy is really good, people have confidence in it, and when they do make the submissions, they are taking seriously, as they are at the moment.
I think the point the Chair is making as well, though, is that we've talked an awful lot about processes here, but these are people that are involved in this situation, and it's hard for them.
Yeah, I fully acknowledge, it's not something people do lightly, in my experience, and I appreciate that it's a stressful, difficult, traumatic time for them. And as an employer, we do try and support that by offering, external support, and also through our staff welfare service. I fully recognise it's a difficult time.
And I think, if I can just jump on that point, I think it's absolutely right. You're right, Mr. Glover. Anybody who has to stand up, and I think again this morning in the evidence session, somebody says having any form of argument with a colleague at home, at work, or whatever is problematic. And what we have done, and I promise you, the PSC has seriously looked at this. When we started to look at the new whistleblowing policy, we want to make sure it is easy to report. It is easy to have a look at that initial investigation. The time frame of when you make the submission, to have the sort of initial meeting with the manager to look at the concerns, and then for that process, absolutely, it is really difficult. And I know, step away from my role as the PSC, I've spoke to a lot of people who have had whistleblowing concerns, and it does affect them, and it does destroy lives. But sometimes it's about uncoupling it and making sure that they are reported correctly, they are dealt with correctly. From my point of view is, I can't talk about what happened previously. All I can do today as the chair of the Public Service Commission is to make sure the policy is as good as it can be. And if you look at it independently, you will see that it is now one of the best in the British Isles, if not the best.
But also, people have seen within the staff that the hurt and the heartbreak that some people have been through. So it is going to take time, isn't it, to get staff to feel confident.
But I think some
that whistleblowing is a normal thing to do.
It is, but I think some of it comes down to some of the misinformation that's being put into the public domain. We all have a duty here to say that if you have a genuine whistleblowing concern, you will be protected and you can report it easily, and we will make sure as an employer that we will look after you. However, the flip side of that is, if it's established that it doesn't fit within the criteria, that it's not corruption, it's not bribery, it's not health and safety, if it doesn't tick that box, then there has to be some acknowledgement that it isn't a whistleblowing case. And if you have an employment concern because you don't like your line manager, you don't like your chief executive, you don't like the job you're doing, that is completely different. And you cannot...
We've got that.
We've got lived experience of whistleblowers
on that, but you cannot use an employment dispute as a whistleblowing. It has to go through the process, and there is now this right to report, and if you report it correctly, we will protect you, and that's the clear message, isn't it?
But you're saying it's the strongest whistleblowing policy. You're saying that we will protect the individual. We are hearing a completely different side. We are not hearing that. So what the questions that we're asking is, as the PSC, what can you do to make sure, and no disrespect to anybody in the room, but getting a report, do you believe the report? Do you actually go and check? Do you get an audit trail? Do you see the pieces of paper? Do you actually see what is happening? Because we are hearing it direct from individuals who are in the process or have been through the process, and it's clearly not how you're describing it, that you want to encourage them to come forward. But the lived experience is people are broken, some people virtually at suicide, and that is not a good thing.
That isn't good, but I mean...
But it is people's lived experience. I'm not saying under your chairmanship or anything, I'm just saying generally I've
followed this, and anyone who knows me, whatever role I do take it seriously, and I am passionate about being the chair of the Public Service Commission. I'm passionate about whistleblowing. I want people to come forward, and I've had a lot of meetings with people who've gone through bad experiences in the past. I haven't seen yet, and I look forward to seeing your evidence to back this up, that people are being treated unfairly today, because I haven't seen the evidence today, and I look forward to reading your report at the end of this conclusion, because if there is, your conclusion say that we need to be even more robust, then we will look at that, absolutely. But here today, people can make a submission today and they will get the support, and there is a clear line of what they can follow. And that should be, regardless of which department you're in, the policy is right across. And if you take Mr. Clewett's point before, you may not need whistleblowing for 2 years. You've had the training 2 years ago. But when you need it, the website's there, the information's there. And if people do not know how to make a whistleblowing case, then speak to your local MHK, speak to your line manager, exactly what the policy. Have an initial conversation, because I have supported somebody through this process. And sometimes when you get really heavily involved in this, an initial conversation would be very helpful, because the one I very vividly remember, only a few months ago, I sat down with the individual. They genuinely, I felt, did have a small whistleblowing case, but not as big as they made. But I think I was able to guide them of how to use the policy, how to draft an email to that department, and for that email then to be accepted. And I could support them without getting involved. And I think this is the separation between our roles as an MHK and as as a chair of Public Service Commission or chair of this committee. It's about decoupling us and saying, right, if you need to have a submission, here's the process. I will support you through that, and I'll hold your hand without getting involved.
So we also, we also had the head of Unite, the union, in Mrs. Holsall, and she talked a lot about psychological damage that people are experiencing through going through the process. So you're not aware of that, the psychological damage that's affected.
Is there any evidence to support that? Because people can say anything. What we need is the evidence to back that claim up.
She's now, the head of the Unite
If that
Union.
is the impression that is going out there, I think we, together, we need to change that culture to say, this policy is to encourage to speak out. Forget about what you think is happening. Here is a clear policy to speak out. You'll be supported, you'll be protected, it's transparent, it has integrity. There are avenues for you to speak up and to speak out.
The head of the union is supporting people that have spoken up, and she talked about it in here in an evidence session and said it was psychological damage to people when they do speak up. So that's what I'm saying. How can we... You're clearly not aware of that, although she was in front of us a few weeks back.
There was no evidence. We saw no evidence of that evidence section. So again, we look forward to reading that evidence. I mean, it's fine to make a statement like that, and the union can do that. And if that has happened, I think everybody on our side is genuinely concerned by that. But I would like to see the evidence of that. And just to go back, when somebody makes a submission, there's a very clear tick list and a checklist which they can follow each process through. So if example, if one stage is not being followed, then at that stage they should stop it and then go and report that and say you have not followed the checklist. We've implemented a checklist to make sure anybody making an allegation of whistleblowing can follow it very clearly. And again, you're absolutely right. Anybody who has to make these submissions, it's the most difficult thing in the world to make a complaint about your employer or to make to any sort of form of complaint. And if you need support, then ask for it.
Does the individual get a copy of the checklist?
Well,
is that just a manager?
It's in the policy.
It's in the policy.
I think I would also add that any policy or process the PSC will acknowledge that sometimes people are unhappy with the outcome of it. That's sort of it's to be expected, and that's why, for example, in the disciplinary there's an appeal process, and in the whistleblowing policy there's a process whereby if you remain unhappy, you can still utilise the grievance process. You can go and speak to one of the prescribed persons. So I think, there's acknowledgement that sometimes things won't always be done perfectly or within the expectations of the whistleblower. So there is a mechanism to catch that up and pick that up. And equally, an individual could go to the Industrial Relations Service for some impartial advice.
Can I just add one other thing? Again, I just want to repeat that this is not about them and us, and the employer should never feel like that. It's not about them and us. Anybody should be able to make a concern through the whistleblowing. It should be investigated, and it should not be. The employer should be grateful for them making that submission. There's no different from when I worked in the finance sector when we had to make disclosures. And I remember the regulator coming out once and saying, we're not getting enough, sort of submissions about concerns. Can you let us know? Suddenly they got entrenched with them. So it's about encouraging people. If they feel something's wrong in the workplace, report it. It'll be investigated. If there's nothing concerned, it will be stopped quite quickly. If it's genuine, it'll go through the full process.
And there is also, OHR and other employing authorities that sit within Isle of Man government regularly meet with the unions. I meet personally with Unite and Prospect on a monthly, fortnightly basis. We meet with all the unions, the Industrial Relations Forum, on a quarterly basis, and we would absolutely expect issues like this to be brought, not individual cases, but if there was an underlying issue with some of these policies, there's absolutely opportunities for the unions to talk to us about that. And even on an individual basis, we work closely with all the unions. There would be nothing to stop them from getting in touch with me on a one-to-one basis to say there's something going wrong here, and I would hope that the unions would trust me enough to be able to say that we will look into it and deal with it fairly, because absolutely we would not want somebody to to feel that they were suicidal in terms of following on from a whistleblower. That's just unacceptable.
I mean, maybe it might help, Madam Chair, that we actually send you one of the templates, because it clearly says, we've got a copy here, which actually gives you an overview of what you can expect if you make a whistleblowing. So, for example, it says, on receipt of all cases no later than 7 days, this disclosure must be made, and it has details on there about names and the date of the whistleblowing. But it also outlines the nature of the disclosure, gives you an opportunity to file it, but then it tells you where you can go and get other responses as well. So there is this process and procedure which to be followed is set out very clearly for the person. It really is. And if people follow that procedure, then they should get the satisfaction they need, but they may not get the result at the end of it, but they will get the satisfaction, and we will be grateful for that submission and for it to be investigated.
That's only recently been introduced. There are still some cases, as we heard this morning, going through employment tribunal and that, so it can't be relied on for them. However, going forward, it's a bit of progress, isn't it? Sorry.
You'd said that the Commission does talk to chief officers, asks if they need support or advice, but you don't hear from whistleblowers, because you'd said, Mr. Callister, that goes into the operational. But, do you not think the Commission has a responsibility to know and assess how the policy and process works from the whistleblower's side?
I think it's a fair point, but we've got to remember, if somebody makes a submission, we do not get the details. And it is dealt with by the accounting officer, the whistleblowing officer. So I don't know how we can reach out to somebody we don't know has made the disclosure.
Yeah. And again, there's a danger there. If the issue is outside our remit, then the best person to actually investigate that particular issue will be the expert or the professional. So if somebody comes to me and says, well, it's about turbine or aircraft, I've got no knowledge of that. So telling me will not help. But what I can do is to direct that particular person to the expert, to the particular officer who will be able to handle it.
And we've got to be careful not to get entrenched that all of our time is spent addressing hundreds of potential submissions. It's not our job to check through those submissions or to listen. Ours is about getting the data back, and as my colleague Augustine just said, if it was something, if we had a load of complaints from, say, for example, the airport, we're not experts in that. And we've got to remember, we've got no resources to be able to deal with that. So what we're looking for is that high level. How many whistleblowing cases are there? Are there trends coming through one department? So, for example, if we suddenly got one a month where all of the whistleblowing cases relate to the Max Care and they all related to A&E, for example, then there may be questions asked. So we're looking for those trends and we're looking for those things. We've also got to remember, we have to allow the whistleblowing policy to go through its course of action. So, it's really hard. It really has. And as I say, I do personally read the court cases on the court website. I do that out of my own sort of, not because I'm on the PSC. I just read them anyway, just to get an overfeel as a member of the House of Keys, just to see what's happening. Again, if there's any trends or anything I need to be aware of, because there are times when the PSC is named on there as the employer. So I am interested in them. I do want to read them, and I am looking to see if there's concerns I need to raise myself.
The question I'm asking here is about balance, really, in that, you said you don't want a them and us situation, and that should
Agreed.
never be it. But you're hearing one side from chief officers. You're hearing...
Can I just clarify? I apologise, Mrs. Corlett, because they're not there to talk to us about whistleblowing cases. They are there to talk about OHR, human resource issues. So I'm interested as the Public Service Commission. So, for example, if they need more support from OHR, we are asking them about employment issues. We're not asking them about whistleblowing cases or employment disputes. We are seeing how things in the department. And I'll give you the example. One department came in and we went through and says, how's everything going? Yeah, fine. We could do with a bit more help from human resources. And we said, well, okay, why do you need some more support? And they gave us an overview and we passed that on through our secretary.
So there's no discussion.
No, we do not.
We
Apologies for any confusion.
Okay, I'm glad you clarified that.
Yeah,
You set me up
I
wrong.
apologise. We do not talk about whistleblowing cases. We get the high level. They come in purely to talk about staffing concerns, about how the department's running. Do they need more resources? Slightly out of this remit. Yeah. Apologies for any confusion I caused.
I think our concern is more strategic. For example, one of the questions we ask them is there any policy or regulation that's actually preventing you from doing your job? We are interested in that one rather than a specific issue.
Again, back to sort of the timing issue. And one of the challenges, we're talking about the policies and the processes that we have put in place for now. Many of the submissions that we have received date back to 5-6 years ago, when the whole situation was very different. And it's very, for many of those people, they believe their cases are still open. Now, I almost guarantee they're not the 14 or whatever you're dealing with, because there's probably even more than those, and we don't know who the current ones are in most cases. So the process that we have now, where you have, you make a report, you get something back in 7 days or whatever, it didn't exist back then.
Great.
The question is, how do we close out those historic cases that are still sort of over us, where there are people who've made claims who feel that they, in some cases we've been told they were acknowledged as whistleblowing things, but they've still had no outcome 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. And have they just fallen through the cracks? I mean, I guess my question is, how do we close off some of the historical stuff so that, we can just, whatever, write it off, and now we start, we've almost, I don't know, a clean slate, but at least we've got stuff going forward. We don't have a fairly substantial cohort of people wandering around that have had a 5-6 year case that still believe that it should be ongoing, or it is ongoing, or whatever, and nothing's happening, because I suspect at the OHR level they're not active cases. And it's really a case of, how do we close that loop?
You want to go to yours first?
I think part of the difficulty is that the whistleblown process isn't about proving or winning or losing. It's about an employee putting their hand up and saying, I think I've seen something wrong. And as an employer, we absolutely would say, thank you very much for telling us. We welcome that. And in many regards, that's the employee's part finished. You know, because they've reported the whistleblower, they've reported the wrongdoing, and as an employer, we would go away and investigate that. And where we can, we will go back to the employee and say, you know, this is what's happened, or here's the little bit I can tell you. In some cases, we might not be able to say anything, particularly if the whistleblower is anonymous. We will have no recourse back to them. But in truth, it's not a policy where we have to go back and satisfy the whistleblower and say, this is what's happened, here's what hasn't happened, here's who's been disciplined. It's a policy that says, please tell us about wrongdoing, and thank you. Now, you know, I appreciate that can be a frustrating process for whistleblowers. I would find that frustrating. So we do go as far as we can in many cases to say, here's what's happened, without, you know, breaching any GDPR issues. But I think that's where some of the frustrations come from, in that people expect to be said, well, we've investigated your protected disclosure, we found X, Y, and Z, or in fact, we didn't find any wrongdoing at all. And I think that's where the frustration comes, because people have an expectation that we go back and say, here's the report, here's what we did, we disciplined Julie and Bob, and, you know, and I understand that frustration, but the process isn't set up to do what whistleblowers expect.
So we could improve the process there then, couldn't we? We could improve it.
I think it's about the expectation. Again, if we make this just about whistleblowing for a moment, forget employment issues. If this is a whistleblowing policy, which is what we're looking at, if someone makes a submission, and once they've done that submission, that really is their task done, and we thank them for that. The rest is up to the department to look at that, to investigate it, and then to have an outcome. Now, what they might want to do is go back to the person at the end of that process, if they've given their details, to say, we have investigated, this is our findings, job done. Now, sometimes people will not accept that outcome, and it carries on and on and on. This is where I think this whole culture around whistleblowing has unfortunately turned sour in many ways, because there are good submissions being made, and systems are being improved every day of the week. The problem is, it's about getting the culture, and one of the things your committee could do is trying to get this culture across, that if you make a submission, that's your part done, and we are really grateful for you to making that submission under the whistleblowing policy. We will now address that, investigate it, and come back with our findings, and that's your job done. But people don't. They carry on and on for years and years and years, and that's wrong.
And that's because there's failures in the process, because they haven't received a data, for example, a data subject access request. They haven't had a response, or there's then been another action that takes place, and they're thinking, well, where's that come from? It's the process that, because they're not hearing anything, and there's, you know, you're in the process, we are dealing with it, we will give you an initial response by 7 days, I think you said now. And these people that are back here are not getting that, and they're still sitting there.
But if they request, you know, depending on what the circumstances, if they've requested and they are engaged in the process, they should get something at the back of the process to say, we have investigated, we don't believe that, you know, there is a safety issue, and for that matter, the close. Now, that individual may turn around and say, well, I think there still is. And this is some of the problems we have. Now, in some cases, they'll say, you're absolutely right, this is what we've done to improve it. So maybe we do need to look at the reporting line just a little bit to make sure that somebody, if they do make a submission, and it is just about whistleblowing, forget employment, if it is whistleblowing, then they get something back very quickly to say it has been investigated within the time frame. This is our conclusion. The problem is sometimes the individual will not accept the outcome. And that is where it goes back to your case, that some people actually 4 or 5 years later are still in grievance because they did not accept the outcome, and they still believe there was a health and safety issue, or was a bribery issue, or a corruption issue.
Well, I think a lot of them also feel that there was detriment. In other words, that they had to leave or left or whatever because of the whistleblowing had led to the other thing, and it does. It goes on forever.
The final step is the law will, you know, if that has happened, and I hope it never happens, but if it has happened, that's where people can exercise their individual employment rights.
Where's your duty of care to the individual? Do you think they've reported something that could be quite serious? You know, some will be, some won't. Where's your duty of care to that employee?
Well, our duty of care is in the policy to make sure the policy is robust. It stands up to the testing. It is then for the employee to test that policy by making the submissions, and then for the departments to make sure they're following the process. That's our duty of care, is to make sure we have got the best policy we can possibly, as the PSC, can put in place. And I stand by that today. We do have, today, 2026, the best reporting of the system. I know you're screwing your face up, Chair, but I'm sorry, but we do. You can test it independently. We have a really good, clear process for whistleblowing on the Isle of Man, better than any other jurisdiction in the British Isles, and I beg you to test that.
And it does deal with complex matters, you know, and I think we have got a transparent, clear process, but it deals with really complicated matters that involve human beings.
And if you read some of the employment tribunals, the outcome, and an awful lot, and to be fair to the chair of the tribunals, he's been speaking out a bit more lately, and he is saying that departments are failing in giving people the responses that they require within time.
But you're talking about employment. We're talking about whistleblowing.
Well, some of them are whistleblowers that have gone to employment tribunal, and there's been outcomes. And, you know, we all know about the main case of Dr. Rosalind Ranson. There was an awful lot of things in that we're still seeing repeated today. And the PSC have a duty, surely, under that, to make sure that they should have never been repeated.
Well, I just want to say on behalf of the PSC, I look forward to seeing the evidence around that, because, again, I really want to separate employment issues relating to whistleblowing. And as I say, I'm very firmly convinced that the whistleblowing policy is good. But I understand that sometimes there's 2 or 3 different. Augustine, did you want?
But you're recognising the current policy, not, and you know that's what Mr. Clewitt was trying to say. It's some people might even still be under the 2021 one. So.
I think it's worth pointing out that the policy itself does not support individual. It is the law. The policy itself does not protect anybody. It is the law that protects. So it is the law. The policy says this is what you have to do. If anything goes wrong, then you have to revert to it is the law that supports, not the policy on its own.
And that's the other thing that we have heard from some of the witnesses with regards to it's the inequality once it gets to that point, because every department of government, every office, every board of government has the full weight of the Attorney General's office behind them, and it's free service to whoever's taken that claim. The individual that can be getting traumatised has none of that. And that's, you know, something that needs to be considered.
The access to the tribunal is free.
But your legal support isn't.
Let's not forget about the overriding objective of the Employment Tribunal as well, which is to make sure that people who are unrepresented have a fair hearing. So it's not that the Employment Tribunal would help those individuals in the true sense of the word, but the tribunal has that overarching duty to make sure that people are able to articulate
straightforward
their case.
process.
Yeah.
I think,
and they're really good at that.
I know we'll send you some details on this, but part 4 of the delegated functions relates to the accounting officer. So it goes about the accountability. I know we all are accountable to make sure employees have the right avenues to make complaints in a timely manner and for them to be dealt with seriously. But there's also the accountability on the accountant officers, which is delegated down from the Public Service Commission. So you're talking to me, if there's an employee, that the accountability first is with the accounting officer within the department. We then would be looking at a higher level to make sure that those departments are carrying out their functions, and we'd do that again, as I've preached before, about the number of submissions, the number of complaints. We look at everything from sickness levels. We look at the number of, you know, if there's what sort of trends are going on in each month about in departments, about open cases and what those cases are broken down. One of that element is whistleblowing. Obviously, there's a lot of other cases as well.
What percentage of PSC employees are in the union?
We don't know that information. We're not.
No,
We're not.
Oh,
They're not obliged. The union's not obliged to tell us. And
oh, okay. It's not compulsory.
No.
It's not.
If you know the figure, we've been asking for this because that will help us.
Simply because if you are in the union, you do have the ability to get union representation if you need to go into a legal dispute.
Lots of people also have access to legal advice under their house insurance policies. So there's, you know, it might not cover everybody, but there is some access. And in truth, you know, the tribunal system was set up so you could represent yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. Got anything else?
Nope.
Anything? Okay. Is there anything further you'd like to add to to help strengthen that speaking up culture. So a young person, 16, starting in Isle of Man government today would never feel that fear to speak up against their maybe new manager.
I think the first thing to do is, I think the new person coming in, regardless of age, coming into the Isle of Man government, first thing they would get is the overall whistleblowing training to make them aware of the policy, and then thereafter they should be able to work within any department within government, and if at some point during their professional career they have a concern that they need to be raised, then they should very much be aware of actually what the whistleblowing policy is, how to make a submission, making sure they've got the right protection, the timeline in respect of investigations and when that outcome will be known, and they get the support that they need. That to me is very, very important. Madam Chair, can I just add one other thing as well? I have tried during this meeting to get the time and the date of when we made the submission to your committee. I will make sure that's given to you via an email. I'm sorry I can't give it to you today, but we are just looking to know exactly when we made that submission, so apologies from our part for any confusion. Okay. Anything you guys want to add?
Yeah, well, maybe on behalf of the PSC, to thank you very much for the opportunity given to us to defend what we presented to you as a policy. We welcome the scrutiny because we are trying to achieve the same thing. We want the best for our employees. We want to know when something is going wrong. So it is not us against them or we here against you over there. We are trying to achieve the same thing. So we do welcome the scrutiny because in this kind of dialogue, you point us to things that we may overlook, which may then be part of what we are going to do when we want to do the revision. So thank you very much for the opportunity to defend what we presented before you.
It strikes me, and from the conversation here this afternoon, what it really says is we are on the same side, and the best outcome is by recognising that and working together.
I would just say to the new starters coming in that you have a duty to report wrongdoing. Your employer wants to know when things go wrong. And I accept that not everybody who goes through any policy, whistleblowing included, will come out the other side feeling 100% satisfied. I do know there are people that do go through it and are 100% satisfied and have rightly raised concerns, even if they're not proven. So I would wholeheartedly encourage anyone to report wrongdoing and be reassured that the law ultimately will give you the protection and that should give you some safeguards.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The committee will now sit in private voice.
Thank you.